Good morning. Welcome to BCubed Sunday morning. I'm Bob Brown, and today, being the second Sunday of the month, we've got Tom Whitmore and friends. And let me get back in camera. And so we encourage you guys to listen, ask questions, buy books, and all the other good stuff. And so, Tom, you want to tell us about your guests?
My guests today are James Van Pelt and Diana Herbst. My brain is gone. And I'll let each of them introduce themselves. We're going to be talking about books in schools and trying to get kids to read more and things that get in the way of kids reading. But Diana, would you like to introduce yourself first?
Hello, I'm Diana Herbst, is how it's pronounced. I am a recently retired special education teacher. I have taught from preschool, well, no, not preschool, kindergarten, through high school, and also in Europe teaching other things. And I would not say an avid reader. I am a reader, just finished one book and need to start another one today. And happy to talk about reading strategies and different resources that you can use and some of the pitfalls.
Okay, James?
I'm James Van Pelt. I am also a retired educator. I taught high school English for 37 years, taught science fiction as a class during that time. I'm also an author, have done some young adult work, including the novel Pandora's Gun. An awful lot of interest working with kids and getting them to read in general. But I found teaching a science fiction class was just an awesome way to reach reluctant readers, because the counseling department had a tendency to send kids into that class who didn't like English and hated the subject but needed a graduate credit. So the class was almost always split between big fans who saw it on the course listing and course signed up, and the ones the counseling set in who hated reading. And what I found was that teaching science fiction, I almost always ended up converting about half of those reluctant readers into liking science fiction.
How did you do that? How did that
that's an entire discussion, but it mostly is because the interest of the material is so high. In an ordinary literature class, when we're assigning classics, I find those things interesting, but I'm an English teacher. But for a lot of kids, Romeo and Juliet is not the way to get them into reading if they didn't like it in the first place. So science fiction, though, even a kid that's a reluctant reader can get interested in a discussion of what you might do if you had a time machine, or what would it be like to be a stranger in a strange land. They can discuss that, because it's not about, talking about, if I use Romeo and Juliet, I keep using Romeo and Juliet, a several 100-year-old romance that covers ground that they get in a more accessible way in every other romance they've ever seen. It works. I like doing it. I loved having reluctant readers in my science fiction class.
Yeah, I had, as a special ed teacher,
we've lost Diana.
Uh-oh.
I hope she manages to come back, and I hope Bob lets her back in. But we can continue. Science fiction also historically has been mostly about plot, where an awful lot of literature is not about, a fast-moving story. And that probably makes it easier for people to read than an awful lot of, say, Faulkner or Hemingway.
Well, the core of any science fiction story, to be science fiction, is its science fictional change in the universe. Mm-hmm. And that doesn't mean there isn't going to be characterization and interesting thematic concerns. In fact, I think science fiction's thematic concerns are part of what make them really interesting, but they're always in some way about whatever the science fictional idea is. And
Yeah.
that's the core that our more mainstream literature doesn't necessarily have. Even or not even though, but the great science fiction titles that are taught as a part of a common literary core, like Lord of the Rings. I'm sorry, Lord of the Flies. Lord of the Rings. Lord of the Flies has a very interesting change in the world of the characters
Yeah.
that creates this canvas for us to discuss the other things. So you can still get into
Diana. Let's get back to Diana, who was interrupted there.
All right.
Glad
Sorry,
you're
I got kicked off. I don't know. I had something unstable, I guess. I actually don't know where I was. We did wind up teaching Lord of the Flies, and also I always loved teaching Sound of Thunder. Just
Ray
to
Bradbury short story.
Yes, short stories, science fiction and short stories are often can be done in like one session, which for reluctant readers is hugely helpful.
Yeah.
Also, I think everybody at this point, because of video games, understands what the butterfly effect is, but they have no idea where that term came from. So sort of taking things back to the roots and surprising your students is often useful. Science fiction also gives you an opportunity to explore a lot of social issues in a much safer venue where you can say this character should have done that without jeopardizing your actual standing as a high school cool guy, which has been quite useful. Anyhow, just some random thoughts. The other thing, of course, is my school was known for social justice and also for being very inclusive, which made choosing authors sometimes a little dicey. The politics behind some science fiction writers and fantasy writers. I'm kind of grouping fantasy in there also. Sorry for anybody who doesn't agree with that. Can at times be something that one needs to consider when you're selecting which books. Although it gives an opportunity to explore, you know what? This author is really anti-Semitic. Here are some tropes. Let's talk about tropes. So
I want to back up that the short story as an inroad for reluctant readers and for classroom use is just huge. And I think my main introduction to science fiction, what really got me hooked into it, what helped me to become a writer, was the short story side. You can teach it in a day. A reluctant reader shuts down if you hand them a novel. It's an intimidatingly large thing for them to do. And the way novels are taught often is a kind of slow slog through the literary values of what is in the book rather than a pursuit of the plot. So we were assigned to teach in the 9th grade, my last couple of years that I was teaching. It was called Rocket Boys. It's what became the movie October Skies.
Yeah.
Or maybe it's the other way around. It's a big book. It's got a lot of cool stuff in it, but it's a big book. And the curriculum required that I worked for a very stupid school district on this. They bought one book, one class.
There one that isn't?
I don't know that there
yes.
isn't. But they bought one class set of books for each teacher that was teaching it, regardless of how many sections they were teaching of it.
Oh.
So we couldn't even give the books to the kids to take home and say, read some of this tonight, and we'll talk about it tomorrow. It had to all be read in class. It took over a month to do the novel. That's even the attention span of a fan. That's too much. It was just awful. But a short story isn't that way. You can read a short story. You can read it out loud to the class and still discuss it, set it up, read it, discuss it, do things with it. I love short stories. The subject here, though, is a little bit about what are the books in the library. And I think that short story collections in our school library and the way libraries are set up in schools, there isn't much for the high schooler. It's partly because the librarians have a tendency to cull old titles. So if the title is more than 10 years old and they can't see that it's been checked out, it gets tossed out of the library, and that short story collections go that way. When I was looking for what are the best selling and best read books right now among young adults, none of them are short story collections. So great in the classroom, but it's sort of a secret way in that I think that most readers have a tough time finding now. I don't know of a high schooler that walks into Barnes & Noble and buys the year's best science fiction, which would be a great introduction to wonderful short stories. It's just not a popular title among the younger readers.
But it used to be that the anthologies that, say, Groff Conklin put together were.
Right.
And
The last really good short story stuff I saw was, I don't remember the editor. I was looking for it before this started, but one of the books was called New Skies, and it was just contemporary young adult authors, or authors writing for young adults, short stories. And there was a fantasy version of it too, but that's been 15 or 20 years ago.
Yeah, there's also been a collection called Unicorns versus Zombies, which was Holly Black and somebody else. One side took side unicorn and the other side took side zombie, and built an anthology with short stories from each.
Mhm.
So I don't know if you can hear me.
We can hear you.
Excellent. It looks like I'm
Yes.
frozen. Of course, not in the most flattering way possible.
Never doubt it.
So getting back to libraries, I did also just want to put in a plug for the Seattle Public Libraries having unbanned books, where anybody from, I think it's age 14 through 26 in the United States, can apply for a virtual library card and borrow books from our library.
There's a big article about that in today's Seattle Times.
So that will be of help, and it's privately funded. So anybody who doesn't want to see public funds going that way, not to worry. This is all through the private funding of Friends of the Library, and
And it also
librarians.
includes territories and possessions, not just the states.
Okay.
From the article, they said people from Puerto Rico had been
Okay.
doing
Yes.
it as well.
Wonderful.
Colorado is a remarkably liberal state, considering where it is in the country. And the book issues that Florida or Texas and other parts of the country are facing are less of an issue here, although I'm in Western Colorado, which is a more conservative side of the state, and our school board makeup is a reflection of that more, that drive to for conservatives to take over school boards. But it hasn't impacted the schools much. I know the high school that I used to teach at, the librarian there regularly does a banned book display.
Uh-huh.
So it puts out, these are the books that are challenged. These are books that people are arguing about. Here they are. You can see them. I think the librarian's role in helping to promote certain kind of reading is huge. It can be huge. If you have an active librarian who lays out books in an inviting fashion and gives kids a reason to see it when they walk in, covers out, here is a selection of these kinds of books, can do a lot to draw kids' attention to them, rather than just leaving the library as a shelved place to be searched for titles.
Yeah. Other ways to find books, because my school, God bless it, was small and did not actually have a school library. So if you order books online, often if you're ordering them, you will get a recommendation of, well, if you liked ABC, you may like DEF.
Right.
Or here are other titles from the same author, or here are titles, similar authors who write in the same vein are useful. And then, it's like, as a reader, I have skipped over intros for years, and then recently started reading intros and finding names of other authors. And I was like, oh, there's something that I can use also. So those are some of the ways that you can locate other titles. And librarians, I cannot say enough about librarians as a resource and great people. They are the best resources I can ever cheer on, I think. And still, I'm still amazed that The Carrot Seed was a banned book, a favorite child story.
I don't know Carrot Seed.
Oh, I believe that's the title. It's a little boy who finds a carrot seed and plants it, and everybody tells him, "Oh, well, it won't grow. It won't grow." And he's like, "I believe. I believe. I have faith. I will do this. I will do that." And in the end, he gets a carrot seed. He gets a carrot from his carrot seed, but it was banned because he rejected adults' advice. Which actually, if you look at almost every single
Kids book that people like,
and every book that has a teenage or whatever the protagonist is, they're always going their own way. They're not listening to the advice. The Gamage Cup, which was another favorite fantasy book of mine, I could not remember the name of the book at all as an adult, and went to our librarian and said, "It's about these guys. They have cloaks of different colors and they're misfits, and they save their town." From, I think, those clues alone, found the Gamage Cup for me again.
Mm-hmm. Yes, as a bookstore owner, I had to do things like that all the time, and bookstore owners are similar to librarians in that way. If you've got a specialty store.
Yes, it has a blue cover.
Yeah. Oh, you mean Startide Rising, which is actually green, but it's the one you wanted. And it turns out to be. So,
sorry, I'm still frozen.
It's just your face. It's not your voice. Your voice is very expressive.
Yes, and loud, I've been told. James, you were what's some of your favorite books to recommend to students?
Well, sometimes it's just finding the book. I was thinking, I'll always have a list of things to recommend, and a lot of times I do start off with short story collections. I don't think that I've ever gone wrong steering a kid into the Martian Chronicles or anything with Ray Bradbury.
Right.
And also some of the anthologies, which are just really, really good for kids that are starting. But my best way to suggest reading for kids was in my science fiction class. I did this in my regular lit classes too, but they always had to choose an independent book to read during the quarter, and then they would report to the rest of the class about that book. But my approach was, I don't want you to give me a literary analysis of this. I want you to do basically a librarian's book talk about the book you read, which was, here's what I read, here's a little bit about what it's about, here's the kind of reader I think it would appeal to, or here's what I thought was really cool in the book. And I got a lot of traction out of that, especially for titles that I wasn't familiar with, because I'm a writer, and writing exactly overlaps reading in terms of time during my day. So now I have time to do something literary. Do I read something or do I write? And my tendency is to move towards the writing side. So like a lot of writers, I am a little underread because I'm not reading all the time. I have a sister who all she does is read. She would be able to give you tons of titles, but the kids gave titles to each other. I went into my Barnes and Noble yesterday to talk to a bookseller there who I know really does a lot in the young adult section. And she said that what she is finding is the biggest driver of book sales at Barnes and Noble right now is TikTok for young adults. That there are influencers, there are young adult kids that do book reviews, and they have lots of followers. And so she knows if she has half a dozen kids in 2 or 3 days come in and ask for the same title, it's because somebody on TikTok said, "Hey, this is a great book. I really like this book. You should read this." And they come in. Not YouTube, not Facebook. Facebook, I guess, is becoming a place for old people to hang out. Maybe Twitter or Reddit. These are where the kids are getting their suggestions for what to read. The readers among them. Remembering all the time that, like always in all of scholastic history, or history maybe in general, reading is a niche activity. It's still a minority of the kids who are readers. But those readers have to have a way to find a book. And it turns out that the online stuff is where they're getting their best suggestions.
Yeah. Just looking in the comments, Cheryl Alexander said that she was introduced to Ray Bradbury via Alfred Hitchcock's anthologies for young readers. Alfred Hitchcock Presents and Alfred Hitchcock, and also, well, anyhow, Alfred Hitchcock was, those short story collections were a favorite of mine, and something that I still, I have Xerox copies of them in my garage. But anthologies are a fabulous way of finding new authors also for folks. One of the challenges for special education students is that their reading level and literacy may not be equal to the interest level. There's sort of a
disconnect.
Pardon? Yeah, disconnect. Thank you. That's a great word. So one website that has been really useful. Oh heck! It just fell out of my head. Something net, CNET. Okay, I'm gonna have to come back to that. There are websites that will actually translate to easier vocabulary and more accessible vocabulary. So finding books online that you can read online is one of the helpful technologies that can be used. Also, running across vocabulary that you don't know, being able to highlight it and have it just defined in a way that actually tells you what the word means, as opposed to confusing people more, which sometimes has happened, is really another way to get readers to a level that they can enjoy what they're reading.
That sort of translation sounds as if it would be somewhat problematic for the authors, at least in many cases. Given, for example, the recent example of the woman who objected to Scholastic taking her comments about racism out of her author's note. They did not attempt to censor the book. They attempted to change the author's note, which they'd requested in the first place.
I had not heard of this.
That would be annoying.
So for an author to say, you changed my words significantly by, in effect, dumbing them down.
Rather than dumbing down, let's say more accessible.
But
yeah, and I think that an author that does that really needs to get over themselves.
Yeah.
I mean, at least for something like that, that's trying to make the work more accessible for students who need accommodation. I don't see anything wrong with that. I have trouble with somebody going through a book and saying, well, we're going to remove a certain bit of the historical content in this book because we don't like that historical content. As opposed to, this is a tough read. Let me see. The best analogy I could come up with would be graphic novelizations of classic fine literature. I mean, so a kid got into Dracula not because they read Bram Stoker's book, but because they read a really good graphic novel interpretation of it. I know that some people would be horrified by that, but I am of the school that everything's a gateway drug. And if that's what they liked, if that's what got them started, fine. I'm for reading everything. That's no different for me than the parents that were freaking out about comic books in the 50s, or teachers that were freaking out about it.
Well, I was just thinking about classic comics.
Yeah, the Classics Illustrated.
Classics Illustrated, yes. Yeah, that and Cliff Notes. Cliff Notes were, it's like, oh my God, I have no idea what's going on. Reading the Cliff Notes, it's like, oh, now I've got it.
Yes, and at least Cliff Notes had in the introduction saying, this is not a substitute for reading the book.
Yes.
Yeah, I would love to be a part of a discussion of any piece of literature where a kid had done a thorough reading of the Cliff Notes, as opposed to what I get a lot, which is a kid who hadn't done a thorough reading of anything. I don't know, a kid that's faking insight because it got out of Cliff Notes is still discussing and interacting with an insight. I'm even okay with that. I don't want them to write their book report because they read it out of Cliff Notes, but every resource you can get. I mean, it's crazy to think that a student that is having trouble with something today wouldn't go online if they really want to know the answer to try to get some help, and they're going to read discussions of it. That's what happens in an AP class, except the discussion would be wider than just the teacher pontificating on their knowledge of something, that you're inviting all kinds of experts in to weigh into different thoughts about the piece of literature. I don't see that as a issue.
Yeah. Liam Westcott comments, imagine doing a Cliff Notes version of Wagner's The Ring Cycle. Well, Anna Russell did.
Yeah.
But it's comedy rather than anything else. And it's rather wonderful. Anna Russell. I don't remember exactly what album it's on, but it's really an amazing, features such lines as, she was the only woman he had met who was not her aunt, who was not his aunt.
And then I'm going to have to put in a plug for Board of the Rings.
Yes.
Which I don't know if that's still in print, Tom, but that was a wonderful.
I believe it is, actually. It was in print for a very, very long time. Yes.
I didn't know what it'd be like to read Lord of the Rings if you hadn't read Lord of the Rings.
I do.
No, you did? I just, because I read Lord of the Rings and I thought it was very funny, but it was because I recognized the riffs of all the stuff from the original book, which I liked and knew really well.
Yeah.
It was pity he stayed his hand. It's a pity I've run out of bullets, he said.
Yeah, I actually I stopped reading it and went to the original and then went back.
There's also an important thing to remember with books, which is that sometimes we aren't quite ready for them.
Mm-hmm.
You know, with Lord of the Rings, the first 3 times I tried to read it, I bounced. At the
I
end
did
of
too.
2 hours, actually.
I didn't give it 3 chances. I think I tried to read The Hobbit when I was in 9th grade or something. And I was just a big science fiction fan. If I didn't see a rocket ship pretty soon, I was going to bail out of the book. And I thought the book, first off, it had a lot of odd names, and it starts off in a kind of childish way. The Hobbit does.
The Hobbit.
And so I got a couple, I don't know, 20, 30 pages in and quit reading it. It wasn't until I was in college that I found a copy of Fellowship of the Ring, left abandoned on a table in the student union. They'd been there for a couple days, and I went in between classes because I was a long way from home. It was a commuter college. And I started reading it, and then I lost a week of school because I read through the whole series and then went back and found The Hobbit, and I just was mesmerized. But I wasn't the right age for it. I wasn't the right reader for it when I was young in high school, because I was reading, I was mainlining Asimov and Heinlein and Silverberg and Zena Henderson and those folks. That was the mode I was in. Those were the writers that I wanted to read.
Yeah, I taught Ender's Game. I had 4 9th grade boys who were like totally unable to follow a bunch of stuff in the regular class. And so I pulled them and we read Ender's Game, which captured them all. And there were a bunch of things that were just sort of missed in that story. And I'm somewhat grateful that they didn't pick up on them. But it was, I could see one kid kind of go, wow, I like reading now. This is kind of cool, and was completely shocked at the ending and was somewhat gobsmacked. And then I showed them the film, which they all hated, absolutely despised the film.
I can understand that.
And also asked the question, why did they change the name of the buggers? One of my favorite questions that I had to dodge.
There's another pretty active conversation going on in my sidebar here, which I don't have any way to respond to type things, but Robin Moore and Cheryl Alexander and Liam have offered thoughts on these. So I'm reading them. I assume that The rest of you can see them too.
We're reading them too. We've each put away
Absolutely.
something from it. Yes.
You're
Yeah,
not
and
tossing
Robin's note about graphic novels is right up there. I think, was it The Kite Runner that was changed into a graphic novel? Certainly Mouse. There's some amazing literature out there that, when turned into a graphic novel, makes it just a little bit more accessible for my old student population.
Right. And what is reading if it isn't the planting of ideas? And when you think about how a book changes you, what you walk away from, the medium of it kind of fades. So if you've read the graphic, well, like Mouse, right? Mouse is a very thought-provoking sort of story. The quality of the things that it does to your brain isn't changed because it was presented in a graphic format as opposed to pure text. I love pure text. I have a tough time reading graphic novels. I wasn't a big comics fan. And so I have a harder time following a storyline. And kids were always recommending graphic novels to me, and manga too. And it's not my cup of tea, but I completely understand what they like about it. And I'm glad to see them, if they give a book report on a manga title, I'm glad they did it because I wouldn't have been able to do it. I had a student teacher who was really big into anime, and I was not. So she said, "Can I show?" I think it was Howl's Moving Castle.
Yes.
The class and discuss it. And I knew it existed. I knew the title because you can't be in science fiction fantasy fandom without knowing that. But I would have never thought to do it myself. And she did such a great job setting this story up, getting the kids involved in it. The kids really liked it. My problem, I think, was my introduction to anime was Pokemon cartoons that my kids watched because they love Pokemon. And I go, that is the worst animation I've ever seen. What are you doing? And so even now that they're adults, my oldest just turned 33 and is still a big fan of that kind of format. And so when I visit them, they will show me titles. They said, "Let's sit down, let's watch this." And I'm thankful for that because I would never discovered it on my own. It's not my strength. It's not my wheelhouse.
Yeah.
We could go completely down a rabbit hole with talking about anime.
Oh, yeah. Or LARPing. I have had students who have set up live action role playing based on books, which has been inspiring and hysterical at the same time. So there's so many ways to integrate it. And by the way, the website that I was trying to remember is called Newzilla. And that actually is for basically news articles that can be read on very many different levels, reading levels. So if anybody is out there teaching current events and needs a website that's free and fabulous, I highly recommend newzilla.com.
Robin Moore mentioned Book Talk, Book TOK, by the way, which is something I didn't know about, but I heard about yesterday talking to my Barnes and Noble bookseller, and she suggests that it's a pretty big thing. So did the bookseller. She pulled it up at Barnes and Noble and said, "Here, look at this." And sure enough, there were it seemed like a gazillion different recommendations for books as TikTok posts.
How do you feel about things like I just brain fart. Alexandria Digital Literature, which doesn't really exist anymore, or the book online forums where people talk about books and get recommendations in general in text form rather than in video form.
I assume I haven't seen them. I mean, I've followed Reddit threads with book discussions. Those are all in text format. So wherever, I'm glad there's a lot of resources for people to get book recommendations in different formats. You can do the same thing.
Yes.
I do the same thing.
Goodreads is exactly the thing that I was trying to think of, Liam. Thank you.
Yes.
Yes.
Oh yeah, Goodreads. Yeah, I'm on Goodreads too.
Something that Seattle has, I'm imagining that other places have also, are small libraries where, like my next door neighbor, I just finished reading a murder
Little free
mystery.
libraries.
Little free libraries, thank you, where people will put some sort of a covered box at the end of their driveway, usually, and it's a book exchange. When you're finished with the book, you can go put it in there, and somebody else can read it. And it's both lovely in being able to get enough space on my bookshelf for the next books, and also for creating a little community
Mhm.
of
We,
books.
we have one right outside our house that we put up, which we keep going through and culling and pulling out stuff that's really not at all to our taste and adding things that we've finished. And Karen occasionally puts some of the BCubed press books out there so that people can get a chance to read those. But it's a little free library is a wonderful thing.
Mhm.
I had one the size of our storage locker. I could actually cut down on the number of books I have and have room on my shelves. But I doubt anyone would allow me to put that at the end of our driveway.
Well, it might be a sight hazard for anybody trying to negotiate getting onto the road and seeing past
Yeah.
the piles.
Yes. I mentioned my storage locker. It's 1,000 square feet. It's a big storage locker, and much of it is books.
Yes. So Liam was just talking about the local library having a small book exchange shelf. We also, our libraries also have that, which is another fabulous resource, along with the annual book sale where people donate their books and you can go buy them for not that much money while supporting the library.
I kept a class library of donated books in the back of the room. The whole length of the back of the room was one long bookshelf that the kids could take books. They could take them, not return them if they loved them. I just kept, it full because there's always books to add to it. And I found that bringing the books to the kids was better than bringing the kids to the books.
Yeah, yeah.
Especially for reluctant readers, because there's no intimidation. They didn't have to check it out. They're not responsible for returning it. They said, "Oh, that looks cool," and they take it. It was a great place to put raggedy books that have been well read and well loved. Those went too. Sometimes I had kids tell me they wouldn't take a book that didn't look like it hadn't been read before. They like the comfort feeling of a kind of soft-edged book that obviously somebody had carried around with them. Kind of the opposite of the librarian who said, "Look, if the book looks worn at all, we're going to get rid of it." I'm thinking, wait a minute, that means the book was popular, right?
Yeah.
But
given what's going on with some parents objecting to libraries, is that sort of a bookshelf safe at this point?
no, totally not. And I felt like my entire teaching career, certainly the last half of it, when I became less of a rebel, I felt like I was dodging bullets and knocking on wood all the time because you don't know, right?
Yeah.
What's going to set a parent on a project.
Mhm.
And you don't want to become some parent's project. But I couldn't not put the books out there. And I think that I was lucky.
Yeah.
Here's another. I taught for 37 years. I never once broke up a fight in the hallway. That's just luck. I had teacher friends that seemed to be stumbling upon fights every month, but never did. So I was
Yeah.
lucky. I never had a parent come after me because of what I taught. In our school district, our middle school we have a magnet school for gifted, talented, where they focus them all into the same middle school. And the teacher there was teaching Ursula Le Guin's The Ones That Walk Away from Omelas, and turned into a huge brouhaha because some parents got together and said they didn't like the content of this beautiful little short story, and they tried to get him fired. And I think he had 6 to 8 weeks of just misery as he went to meetings, and his whole curriculum was being looked at, and everything else about what he was teaching to middle schoolers. And I think that that's a beautiful story to teach to middle schoolers. But it seemed to say drug use was okay. It seemed to say that non-religious guided sexual activity was okay. I didn't know how to phrase that. Right. But those are passing things in the book in the story, because the story really is about what price do you pay for a good society? And are you willing to live with the price that you pay for a society that's happy? And that's a great discussion point with kids. Like
Yeah.
if your cell phone is being made in a sweat factory in China with 12-year-old kids who, in despair, fling themselves from the roof, is that really worth owning an iPhone?
Yeah.
You're
If your car,
yeah,
if your car is killing children in accidents or by changing the climate, is it worth owning one?
exactly. Those are important discussions, but that's not what the parents picked up on.
Yeah.
Right. Just like anything else, this would be the parent that freaks out because the word damn is in a story.
Mm-hmm.
Said, oh, I don't like that kind of stuff, and that's okay. I really did dodge bullets. I taught Romeo and Juliet, which is pretty graphically sexual. I taught that my entire career.
Well, and also 2 teenagers that within 3 days fall in love and kill themselves.
Right.
It's like talking about dysfunctional.
I taught, the Ray Bradbury's Carnival story. Forgot
Something Wicked This Way Comes.
Something Wicked This Way Comes. Thank you.
Yes.
It has an incredibly sexual chapter in it that everybody reads over because his language and his kind of poetic way of approaching things hides it. So I was always interested when we assigned that. It's a very short chapter. It's called the Theater, something like that. It's I think from the description of it, it's a whorehouse near their neighborhood where Jim and his buddy climb this tree and look in the window. No one's ever called me on it. No one, and the kids didn't even know that was there. I'd have to go back and point it out to them. They said, "Did you notice that was going on in that? What do you think that they were looking at? What is it that Jim wants to see that his friend doesn't want to see, or the other way around? I don't remember what it is." But but it's just pure luck. As I said, it is luck. You do not know what a parent is going to call you out on. And our school board in Western Colorado in Grand Junction might very well support the parent on this and say, look, we're going to call your curriculum into question and start you over again. I think it's a scary environment to teach in, but I don't know how you can teach unless you're a little brave. I don't know what else you can do.
Yep. Yeah. Well, and it's interesting because on both sides, I've had teachers who have gotten into trouble for teaching J.K. Rowling because of, her stance,
because of her as the author.
Because of her right. Anti-trans statements.
But she's also been, banned because of magic.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Poor person. I mean, gets it both ways and sideways.
It's both ways with her.
Yep. Yeah. Just to get back to books in the classroom, to this day, I don't remember the teacher's name, but she every Friday had a whole bunch of books that she would put up on the blackboard, and we would be able to go up and just have silent reading. That was Friday's silent reading. It's probably also when she graded papers and was absolutely wiped out from a week worth of teaching. But she had joke books, and being the sort of child I am and also the child I am, the jokes, we would read them and we'd just be howling. And, you'd go up and you'd have to tell her, it's like you'd raise your hand and say, come on up. And you could climb into her lap and tell her a joke. And, this poor teacher must have heard this joke 12 times and laughed every single time. And just, it's like the joke books were a favorite of many of us in the class. And then you could trade books with your friends also. That and scholastic books, the scholastic book fairs where you got to order books and read your own books.
So much of love of reading gets planted early. My wife teaches first grade. She's still teaching. And that seems to me to be a big part of her job, is finding titles, getting kids interested in reading, encouraging reading. I get started early. It's hard to get them to stop later.
Well, my late partner, who I think most everybody knew as an avid reader, as a matter of fact, he had, I don't know how many bookshelves of, the whole room was bookshelves, and filled. He did not start reading until third grade, and he read a book about sports, and all of a sudden, books were no longer stupid and dumb, but they were like information. He could get fun stuff from there, and from there he had a massive science fiction collection, and was just a lifelong reader from then on. But it wasn't until he found something he could connect with and a purpose for why somebody would want to read. My brother, who is a sports writer, got into it because my Aunt Belle gave him a subscription to Sports Illustrated, and he started reading about sports. And it's like, oh, I can write about sports too. So that he, there's that excitement that you have to get that spark. The the level of non-readers in third grade is often used as a predictor of how many prisons should be built, which is just a horrifying factoid that I picked up somewhere. But if you have a bunch of non-readers in third grade, that's a fairly good prediction of non-success.
I gathered together titles and authors that seem to be very popular now. Because, if I gave the list, here's what you should read, it's going to be books that I read when I was 15.
Yeah. The golden age of science fiction is 12.
These are the things that kids seem to be reading now. This is through a bunch of different talking I did to people to get ready for this. Star Wars tie-ins are still really popular, are really popular. Brandon Sanderson, who's a force of nature, has a lot of young adult titles which are also selling very well and moving very well. I got Amy Kaufman and Jay Kristoff's The Aurora Cycle, which is sort of like Guardians of the Galaxy except with young adult protagonists. I can't pronounce his name. Xiran J. Zhao, Xiranjxhao. The Iron Widow, which is sort of a female protagonist mech novel, which I've heard a lot of kids talking about. There's Marvel Universe tie-in books are popular. I liked Mackenzie Lee's Loki. I thought was pretty good. Rory Powell's Wilder Girls, sort of a female Lord of the Flies. Do you know the Miss Peregrine's book for peculiar children books?
Yeah,
those seem to be really popular.
Those are fabulous.
Yeah.
If I wanted to give a child a subversive book on purpose, I would give them anything by Cory Doctorow, starting with Little Brother.
Don't forget Terry Pratchett.
And Terry Pratchett, too. I like Carrie Vaughan's Martians Abroad, Daryl Gregory's Harrison Squared, or the album of Dr. Moreau. A younger title, more like a middle school, Paolo Bacigalupi's Zombie Baseball Beatdown, is so much fun. And Shipbreaker. But also, kids are still reading or are reading have been.
Kenneth Oppel's name should not be left out of that.
Which one?
Kenneth Oppel.
Okay, yeah.
Also, Kingfisher.
Yeah.
A Wizard's Guide to Defensive Baking. I have read, reread, and loaned to friends and asked for it back.
And isn't that a great title? That's a beautiful title. I love that
Bruce
one.
Vernon.
Rick Riordan, the Percy Jackson books are still very popular. I know, just to throw the name out, triggers some people, but they're still the best-selling young adult titles is Harry Potter books, J.K. Rowling.
Right. Also, Half Magic books. If anybody likes J.K. Rowling, the Half Magics were a great follow-up series.
Sarah Moss
I know
is really popular too. A Court of Thorns and Roses and others. Also, a whole topic of literature I didn't know existed until about a year ago, which was lit RPG. So novels that are based entirely on gaming systems. A lot of times the novel is about somebody in a Dungeons and Dragons. I mean, explicitly in a Dungeons and Dragons kind of world where they're doing hit points. I read one book. I didn't think this could work at all. and I don't remember the title or the author, but it would stop and give you the charts of here we are on your hit points as a character, and it worked.
There's a whole subgenre of anime called isekai, which is about people who are reincarnated into basically Dungeons and Dragons style worlds.
Yeah, that's it, RPG.
Yeah, but there are several different series every year that use this as a basis. There's one called Ascendance of a Bookworm, about a girl who is reincarnated into one of these and wants to have books, but there are no books.
Right.
Because books are rare and hard to produce. So she has to come up with the entire book publishing industry.
Well, also Ronald, I'm going to mess up his last name, Dahl. James and the Giant Peach. All of his were fabulous. And oh God. I'm blanking on the person's name now. Oh well.
Name it. Maybe I don't know it.
I cannot. Never mind. I also just want to say Happy Mother's Day, and are you my mother?
Yes.
It is a happy Mother's Day, isn't it?
Yes.
My mom my parents would not buy me toys if I asked for them. They would put them on my birthday list or my Christmas list. So they never impulse buy a toy for me. They never impulse bought candy, but they never failed to buy a book that I exhibited an interest in. And that was, so I walked into a bookstore with my mom. She was the big reader in our family in terms of just reading all the time. My dad was a reader too, but just giving a kid a book of their own and letting them choose it. I think the sole piece of advice I have for parents of young children is let them pick books.
Yeah. Yep.
I maybe it's a good idea not to give them any toy they want, certainly not all the candy they want, but let them pick books. And
I was reading in the basement as a child because that's where a playroom was, and I was completely absorbed into Alfred Hitchcock Presents. And my mom came downstairs, saw me, and said, "Boo." She had to peel me off the ceiling when she finished laughing. But I was so absorbed in books that it was the one time that I could completely enter into another world and be so happy there. I also just have to recommend The Secret Garden and The Little Princess classics for folks.
I grew up in a family which was full of readers. My mother had a book that was signed to her by Doc Smith, and my father was buying Lord of the Rings as it came out in the British editions. So
I found out the other day that my dentist is his grand aunt was Zena Henderson. And
wow.
He didn't know that she was famous until I talked to her. He said, "Yeah, I had my Aunt Zena, she, gave me a signed book when I was a little kid." And that's all he knew of her. I said, Zena Henderson? So he had to go look it up and then call his mother to find out, his aunt was Zena Henderson. I thought that was very cool.
Did she pronounce it Zena or Zena?
I don't remember now. Short-term memory. Somebody online probably can correct me, but I think I've gone back and forth between the two of them.
Well, we're beginning to come to the end of our time here, but we could go on for hours. And if we want to go on with recommending books and authors, we just keep going until the cows came home. I'm a big fan of Peter Dickinson, who has never made it big in the world, but he has the ability to write from a different viewpoint in each book. And everybody thinks this is easy, but he writes from the point of view of a blind kid in one book.
Point of view of a blind kid?
Yes, exactly. Highly recommended. Worth digging up. It can be hard to get into him. I tried to read a bunch of books and didn't go anywhere with it. Just sort of went and then read King and Joker, which is about an alternate British royal family, which has two viewpoint characters, and all of a sudden I realized what he was doing in terms of writing in completely different language with the two of them. Not because Not that the language sounded all different. It's all English. You use completely different words, concepts, thoughts. Anyway, but that's one of my bugaboos. He's and we keep mentioning Terry Pratchett in passing, and his Tiffany Aching books are certainly a wonderful place to start kids reading.
And his daughter is coming out with another book about Tiffany Aching, and some just came over on Facebook. I need to dig more into that.
Yes.
Yeah, he's a favorite author. He and Bill Bryson.
So any final words? Any final words from either of you? Diana first.
Keep reading. When the kid is interested in something, have them go find something out about it. If you tell them about it, they will probably go, yeah, whatever.
On the general topic of reading within the schools, I think that teachers can do, who already do, but can do as much as possible to encourage reading, like librarians who bring in authors for book talks or just author presentations, author readings, doing book talks themselves, sponsoring book clubs or writing clubs, reading clubs, putting out those displays of books that they'd like to highlight. Teachers can do that too, bringing in books into the classroom, like my lending library at the back. Parents can help by letting kids choose books. We're going to a bookstore, you get to choose a book. Those are the most powerful ways I can think of to encourage more kids to read. And as a teacher, I had a tendency, if I saw while I was talking that a kid was reading a book, I left them alone.
That's good. I like it when, I could have used some more teachers like that when I was in school. I was in a biology class in the 7th grade. One of the girls sitting behind me pointed out to the teacher that I had a comic book inserted into my biology book. And his response to her was, when you get the grades on the test that he's getting on the grade, you can read your comic books too.
Oh, good.
That is funny.
And
when I was in junior high, I carried a briefcase, which was truly a weird thing for a junior high student to do. But I carried it because I could set it up on edge on my desk and read behind it. And I thought I was being really clever because it hid that I was reading a book. But once I became a teacher, I realized, no, that's not the case at all. Because if you're taking attendance, and you go, there's Mary, there's Tom, there's Leslie, there's a briefcase, there's the teachers knew. And I think they just said, let the sleeping dog lie. And because I was quiet, I was reading behind my briefcase.
When I was in high school, I had an upperclassmate, fellow the next class up, who I would bring 6 science fiction books at the start of the day and lend them to him, and he would give them back to me finished at the end of the day.
Wow. Fast readers.
Elmar Schweizer was his name. So,
yeah. Well, I have to say, I very much appreciate you being here, and thank you for your service as teachers, because I was reading up and watching some video on the Florida, book selection process that kind of made it into the news. And one of the Florida teachers was during the interview pointed out that your education that you get in high school, in junior high, in grade school is one of the key factors in determining just how big your world is going to be. And I take that very seriously because there are people whose world has never gone beyond Sunday school, going to school, maybe playing football and marrying their, it's just, there's no size to it. They've never been out of the county hardly, except for a football game. And so anytime that we can use the education to expand the resources, expand the limits of a child's world and make it a bigger world, then we're in a good place doing a good thing. And those that would try and restrict learning and say, well, you can't teach about slavery. You can't teach about racism. You can't tell them what happened in Oklahoma. You can't tell them about the Trail of Tears. You can't tell them about the Fort Laramie Treaty. You can't tell them about any of these things because that makes the rest of us kind of feel bad that our ancestors were such dickwads. So I believe that it is important that we don't turn our schools into a liberal arts to teach, Hillary Clinton's pizza parlor etiquette. That was a joke, son. But that we actually use it to teach things that go beyond what they're exposed to every day. So thank you for that. Now, go ahead.
Just thanks for inviting us, Bob. This was fun.
Well, it's always fun, especially when, I had a seance while you were on. Jay Lake wants his shirt back.
Well, it's an homage to Jay more often than not.
God bless him. Green BCubed Press, we are a little socially conscious on one side. We routinely give and donate and pay, and our writers donate and pay monies to the ACLU because we believe that this is also important. And we have got a number of open calls out right now. Books are for sale. As one of our most recent books that we that we published was Post-Roe Alternatives. And I would encourage you, as a book that is out there that talks about and addresses some of the social issues. That's what we do at BCubed. We tend to address social issues. So we've got an alternative leadership book where we're inviting people to write. And that's a story that says, how do the non-traditional get into leadership? And how do they manage it when they're there? It's just Deborah Godfrey is editing that. She's doing a fine job. And so we look forward to your submissions. She's also currently actually editing a book called Madam President, specifically about women in leadership roles. Now, Karen, if Karen's back there, I know she can wave, even if we can't see her.
She said, hello.
Cool. Karen is editing a book called Bless Their Hearts. Actually, it's Alternative Truth Southern Edition. Bless their hearts. Because
bless her heart.
Yeah, bless their heart. You can say anything you want to about somebody in the South as long as you follow it up with bless their heart. Their head.
That's nice.
Oh yeah, you can. Their head sure ain't on straight. Bless her heart. But anyway, we got all these books coming out, and so I would encourage you, if you're a writer, to send us your work. We're not too evil about it, and if you're a reader, pick up a BCubed Press book. We love doing it. I was so thrilled to hear Tom talking about putting BCubed Press books in his library, because now I am moving into a town not so far from a school where I have kids walking by, and I've already got the plans drawn up for my little end of the drive walkway. And two things are going in there. One, my granddaughter, that I have her on an automatic book order. So she just gets books picked by not me. So she can dump them in there, and then I can put in BCubed Press books. I can drop in a few Irene Radford books every now and then, or books I picked up at cons. It's going to be fun. So, but anyway, I thank you guys for coming.
Thank you.
Thanks for the invite.
Thank you, James.
Thanks, Tom.
Thank you, Diana. I bet this is the only time you've been accused of having a poker face.
And one other thing, a happy Mother's Day to all of the mothers out there who bought their children books, and gave them time to read them and didn't tell them they were going to ruin their eyes trying to read a car under passing street lights on the way to somewhere at night. Anybody here ever done that?
Oh, yeah.
Without getting car sick?
Yeah, so there's an old thing about
So
as you're
just
walking.
you gotta love it. So thank you, mothers. And y'all take care and wave goodbye.